Here's a fun one, guys. What if I told you that there are several persistent falsehoods that have circulated amongst the driving community within the food delivery gig space? I'm going to start with one of the most persistent and absolutely false ones out there, which is if you accept more offers, you will get better offers. I know from personal experience that this is not true. Anytime I've even reasonably escalated my acceptance rate on either of the apps, has not resulted in better offers coming in. Offers are entirely predicated on your location relative to the restaurant's orders and how many orders the companies get coming in. If you happen to be... Now, it doesn't mean that you always have to be the closest driver, but it's the general trend, it seems to be. I mean, I don't get... So let's say, if you look at a map, if you pull up Forest Lake, Minnesota, our zone on DoorDash extends all the way down to the nearby city of Hugo, which is about 10 miles south. Occasionally, I do get offers in Hugo, even from sitting in this apartment here in Forest Lake. Now, in the process of explaining this, I'm also going to probably debunk another myth. And that myth being that, well, driver market is oversaturated. No, it's not. If anything, most of these markets don't have enough drivers, particularly my own. Again, Forest Lake population 20,000, Hugo population about 16,000. So there are neighbors to the immediate south, and I know exactly where the border between the two is. It's in a rural area. So you got two smaller cities with small-sized populations. They do border each other, but it's in a rural area between the two. Now, I just said that I will sometimes get an offer for somebody in Hugo sitting in Forest Lake, which proves this point that the oversaturation myth is false. If the market was oversaturated, why would they need to why would they need to put the request to a driver 10 to 12 miles north of the restaurant? Why would they ask for a driver in Hugo or a driver in Forest Lake to do a pickup in Hugo? And there's also another element to this, and that's the stacked orders. If there was an excess of drivers, why would stack orders even exist? If it was an oversaturated, flooded with drivers type of market, stacked orders shouldn't exist. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a hot second on this one. Yes, I do believe, and we've seen this before, where DoorDash in particular will combine orders together in order to be able to get a less desirable order delivered and make them look better as a combined unit. So this is how they get the no-tip orders delivered. For those who have been in the business for a long time, you can tell which orders don't have a tip with them, particularly on DoorDash. But this is true for both apps. If you get an order, you know that the base pay for these apps is between $2 and $3, regardless of mileage. If they don't have a tip on them, that's what the offer is going to come in as. It'll come... If I'm making a delivery from Forest Lake out to the Wisconsin border, it's 20 miles east of here, and they don't tip, it'll come in as $2 or $2 and change. Now, the other types of no tip orders that they will try to squeeze in tend to be the shorter ones. So let's say it's an in-town order inside of Forest Lake. It goes maybe a mile or two. No tip, but a $2 trip. It'll be combined with that longer 20-mile trip that is maybe $25. And then it comes in as a $27 offer. If they had an excess amount of drivers, if it was really oversaturated, there would be drivers taking those minimal orders, and still the stacked orders would not have to exist. But of course, DoorDash and Uber Eats, it's in their best interest to get all of their requests delivered successfully. They don't get paid if a trip doesn't get accepted or a delivery doesn't get made. They're leaving money on the table. And so they need to make sure that every trip gets delivered. And again, if there were more drivers, if this was a saturated market, there would be drivers desperate enough to take all of those orders, $2, $3, whatever. So yeah, there would be desperate drivers out there, and it would not this idea of having to stack or combine orders, two of them into a single trip, two different restaurants, two different customers, having to be stacked together. This whole idea of needing to combine a low no tip order with a more traditional one, the whole idea of having to stack them in order to get them delivered wouldn't exist, because there'd be some desperate numbskull out there who'd take the $2 trip, no questions asked. Which then brings me back to myth number 3, which is that you have to maintain a certain acceptance rate or else you get kicked off the platform. Again, not true. And I can prove this because my acceptance rate has been in the low teens to high single digits for years. I only take the trips that are going to make me money. I don't take money losing trips. If they would have wanted to kick me off the platform for a low acceptance rate, it would have happened by now. And because it hasn't, they actually legally cannot kick you off for a low acceptance rate. Now I'll tell you why. Because if they did, then they would no longer be able to classify us as independent contractors, because it would be considered extreme control over the job. And the gig companies cannot exert above a certain amount of control over the job and how drivers do it. Otherwise, they lose the ability to classify us as independent contractors, and then they have to start paying us like regular employees, which for them is not good. It becomes a lot more expensive of a game for them to play. So that is definitely another myth out there. However, one thing they can get you for is what's called completion rate. Completion rate, of course, means that once you accept it, they want you to complete the trips. This they can get you for. Now, a completion rate, you can't fall below 90%. Otherwise, you're out. Now, I happen to believe that in my specific market, there is a caveat. And that's with any market where the wait times exceed normalized or standards, whatever they consider normalized standards. And the thing of it is, I think there's a buffer that's built in, and that's why my completion rate still sits at 98%, even though I've declined a few lately. Now, why do they create the buffer rate on this one? Yeah, there was a large period where my completion rate wasn't tracked at all. But why? Well, again, going back to that whole concept of the company needing as many of the requests that they get completed as possible. You see, in the Forest Lake market, we have a very much an above average wait time at restaurants. This hurts the platforms. It does not help DoorDash or Uber Eats to have drivers waiting 20 to 30 minutes at a restaurant for an order. They need as many drivers moving as possible, completing orders. But if you're stuck in waiting at a restaurant for an extended period of time, you're out of commission. You're not completing orders for them. You're not making them money. And so I think that's why the completion rate rules have been relaxed here somewhat. Have they been eliminated entirely? Well, no. But have they been relaxed somewhat? Yeah, they have been. You have to decline several in a row before your completion rate even falls down to 99%. Let alone the 90% that you need in order to be deactivated. So that goes back to this market not being oversaturated at all. They can't afford to kick drivers off, which is why some of these rules get fudged a little bit. Uber and DoorDash cannot afford to kick off drivers. They need every single one possible out there. And so that's the explanation for that end of things. I am going to go into another fact here real quick. It's not necessarily dealing with a myth, but you notice I've almost never mentioned the third player in this space, and that is Grubhub. The reason for that is I can't speak to Grubhub. You know, people think that the three delivery apps, DoorDash, Grubhub, and Uber Eats, all deliver everywhere. Not true, they don't. I've never mentioned Grubhub on this app because Grubhub does not serve the Forest Lake market. We're too far from the cities. The suburb of Blaine, which is a few miles to our southwest, is as close as they come. Grubhub only controls about 5% of the U.S. market. Uber Eats controls about 33% of the U.S. market. And DoorDash controls the rest. Within Forest Lake, DoorDash controls 90% of the market. Uber Eats only controls 10% of the market, or 1 out of every 10 orders. And of course, as I just mentioned, Grubhub does not participate here at all. Grubhub does not compete everywhere. The further away from your city that you are, the less likely you are to have Grubhub service. But Grubhub does not service this area at all. And so, if you ever hear a myth that Grubhub services everywhere, it does not. Forest Lake is a duopoly, and a very slanted one at that, with one player in the market being DoorDash, basically controlling a near monopoly. And then you're wondering, how did that come to be? Well, again, on a national level, DoorDash has more of the contracts with the larger chains. And we do have a good number of chains here in Forest Lake. But on that particular note, Uber Eats does have some of the chains as well. And of course, Grubhub controls such a small fraction of the market that if they were to operate out here, their order volume would be so small that they would probably lose money being in business in Forest Lake. Despite the fact that all you really need is a set of drivers, an app, and a certain amount of reception. Which of course this market is also a little bit short on, but I covered that in the previous video. As far as other myths is concerned, I addressed another one in the previous video. No, the drivers in restaurants do not get the orders at the same time. The driver will get the request about 5 minutes ahead of the restaurant, done in the interest by DoorDash of keeping your food fresh. It's not as true on Uber Eats. But on DoorDash, absolutely true. I know because I got this proof to me once at the Chipotle here. So you as the driver on DoorDash will get the order about 5 to 10 minutes before the restaurant does. So never hurry. You don't need to. So we'll call that good for this episode. We'll see you next time. Peace out, homies.